going to be another big year on the political stage all around the world. It already has started to be incredible with so much going on, with Joe Biden in a bit of trouble there in the United States, and even in Brazil with terrible scenes earlier this year with supporters of Bolsonaro storming the Capitol. We've seen all those sorts of things before, haven't we? So what sort of year are we in for, both locally and internationally? Dr. Maxine Newlands, lecturer in political science at James Cook University, has had a break and is all ready to plunge back into the political pool for 2023. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, and Parliament doesn't even go back for, 5 weeks? It's already up and running.
Indeed, which has given people like the Prime Minister and the opposition leader the chance to travel around the country, and they've popped in to our region a bit.
Yeah, so we saw Anthony Albanese's come into Townsville and also popped into Cairns on his way back from Papua New Guinea, where he's made a very big statement, and they've come up with this agreement around security and more collaboration between, more formal, if you like, collaboration between Papua New Guinea and Australia. So that's a real move in that sort of continuation of Penny Wong's work around shoring up support in the what's perceived threats from China and the sort of increasing pressure China's putting on those Pacific islands. So a really big move.
Will it not mean much until the Prime Minister can deliver maybe on that possibility of an NRL team for PNG in the Pacific Islands?
Well, yeah, and obviously
that seemed to get the biggest round of applause when they were talking about anything that could happen with sharing.
Yeah, well, I think that's fair enough. I mean, and also we've had some PNG teams play cricket down at the Riverway.
Yeah,
so, it's not just NRL, but...
Could sport be the key factor here?
See, you can't separate sport and politics. We know that from previous Prime Ministers that have always been at the sport. So, yeah, I think don't worry about security. Let's just make sure that the NRL... But that would be really exciting. And, it doesn't... As we always say, we're nearer to Port Moresby than we are to Brisbane, and that relationship with PNG has got deeper and deeper over the years. But I think it's also, there was a big effort by Anthony Albanese to really acknowledge they are a completely independent. Obviously, they've had independence in 1975, but that kind of they're being recognised as a sort of a country that have power, that have a seat at the table. And that's kind of what that does, so it's very important internationally.
Absolutely. And yes, and of course football.
Yeah.
And while we've been, talking about back to the new year, an issue from last year, that energy issue is once again reared its head with the government's policy of price capping for gas prices now being a bit of a political bone of contention this week.
So it's basically, it's going to turn into a stoush if it hasn't already between the energy suppliers and the parliamentarians. So as you'd expect, the opposition are working with the energy suppliers, but just to refresh your memory, there's a cap on any new contracts. This is the key point. Any new contracts, there has to be a cap. I think it's, I've got to check this, 12 gigajoules and $12 per gigajoule, and it's normally sold at 41. So they can't sell it at more than 12. So what they've now said, some of the energy companies, well, we can't take on any new customers. So that's that whole, because it's, the existing contracts didn't apply. It's still pushing up the pressure. There's this, obviously, if you remember, there was a deal done with the Premier, so they would be compensated for any loss of royalty tax from this, and this doesn't seem to be happening. But at the end of the day, the government actually legislated for this. They pushed it through the House right at the back end. Seems a long time ago, doesn't it? So this isn't a policy that can be challenged or can go to a commission. It can still be challenged, the law, but it's being put through. So it's going to become a real kind of political stoush. And of course, it's you and me and our electricity bills and our energy bills and gas, which is going to be impacted by it. So it's a line that Anthony Albanese and the Labour government are going to have to tread very carefully. But I don't think it's the last we're going to hear of it.
Well, he was asked a few times this week if he's going to change that policy at all. Yeah. And the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has certainly had a bit to say about that too.
Yeah, that's right. He's had quite a lot to say about quite a few things. We're starting to hear his voice now, after sort of the election back in May. So he's been talking about that and obviously saying that it's going to have a longer effect on the price. It's going to create, there's the classic threat of the term blackouts, and having come back from the UK where it seems a lot more realistic there with all their strikes, there is a little bit of that going on, but I think it's obviously being done to kind of get people talking like we are now. And then that's where I say it's becoming a bit of a political stoush, and I can imagine that we're not going to hear the end of this, and there will be a lot of pressure, not just from Peter Dutton as the opposition leader, but we're seeing like Simon Birmingham's come out this morning and saying that, it's not fair and that it needs to be revised, this policy. So very interesting, because of course Labour got it through because they have the majority in the House and Liberals and Nationals don't. So, yes.
Well, let's move on to the international news that was big yesterday. Jacinta Adhern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, saying that she's stepping down, not enough left in the tank to contest the election later on this year. I think a lot of people were very surprised about that, but there's also been a commentary as well in the last 24 hours that while she may have been very popular on the international stage, things had changed at home for her.
Yep. Yeah, so just talking anecdotally to some colleagues from New Zealand, they were saying that the support. So it's really interesting, this. It's a similar situation to Boris Johnson, believe it or not. And what the political thinking around this is, and I've read a few papers, is effectively because any leader has managed through a crisis like the pandemic, the standard and the expectation is super high. And there was some criticism then. There was a big lockdown, if you remember, in New Zealand. Long lockdown. And there was some, disagreement over that. And so, like Boris Johnson and Jacinta Ardern, their peak, if you like, was during the pandemic, their leadership, their premiership. And so when that isn't maintained, people expect it to be maintained.
But didn't Boris, his downfall came from his behaviour during the pandemic, as it turned out. Jacinta Ardern seemed to be doing all the right things.
Yeah, but it came out later, if you remember. Some of it did come out, but it all came out after at the time. And he was already there were question marks over, like they wouldn't have pushed that if they knew he had the support of the country.
Yes,
so there is that component, but also she has been, there's a lot of pressure, as she said herself. At her Clarke, they can get married now to her partner. She had famously had the baby. And I think just, it's those days, I think, of serving your country and being in politics until you pass are sort of gone now, and she'll probably go on, like previous prime ministers in New Zealand, to have careers elsewhere.
And what do you think she would do? Because she does have that great international profile. I mean, even pop stars like Pink yesterday were tweeting her saying, well done on the leadership that you showed. So what do you think would be next for Jacinta Ardern?
A break, I'd imagine, a bit of time out, but then wherever her passion is. So we may see like Julia Gillard, who's very much gone down the path of women and gender representation and looking at gender leadership.
And mental health.
And education, which is originally where she came from. So we can, and a bit like, whose complete surname I've forgotten, the previous
Helen Clarke.
Helen Clarke, thank you. I should know with the same name as you.
No relation.
She kind of went off to do a lot of travel things. So, and then we look at someone like Kevin Rudd, who's obviously got that place in the position as the ambassador in the States. So she may do a role like that. She may write books. She may just disappear into... I think the thing is that you don't have to be in the political spotlight once you become the Prime Minister. You can have a second life, if you like.
Yes. I just from what I was hearing from a lot of people on social media yesterday, they wanted her to have an ongoing role, making the news that she's stepping down at such a young age.
Yeah, and I guess the thing as well is that you're in such that prime spotlight position, like you say, on the international stage, that, you'd want to make the most of that, being in that fortunate position in order to, advance, as we said, like some of the previous prime ministers.
Who knows what the future will hold.
It'll be interesting as well, very quickly, whether New Zealand retain Labour at the election or whether it goes to the Conservatives, because obviously that makes an ally for our Labour government as well on the international stage.
And that's interesting too, because I understand they need to now pick a leader who will then be stepping into the role of Prime Minister.
That's right.
Because the election is not until October
the 7th, yeah. We could see, like the UK again, how many are they going to get through before they find one?
Well, I understand the deputy doesn't want to put
apparently
his hand up.
No, so they will have to have a call through the party, through the caucus.
And what does that mean for the community? I mean, we talked last year about long election campaigns and get it over with, let it happen. The poor people of New Zealand now have a date for when the election will happen. So would campaigning be getting underway now? Would the opposition be hitting the hustings from today.
Pretty much, yeah. I think they probably would have been hitting them before, because normally there's a sort of, at best a 10 to 12 month run up at these things. So whoever comes in is going to be seen as weak because they're new to the position. Less than 10 months sort of thing. So by the time she actually steps down, it'll be 9 months. So it's going to be a real Achilles heel for whoever does come in, unless, as always, it's someone that has a lot of popularity. But as we've just said, Jacinta Adhern hit such a peak during the pandemic, it's going to be very hard for anyone to follow. So it'd have to be someone that's almost opposite.
Well, maybe they should contact Peter Jackson or
maybe
Neil Finn or somebody.
I was going to say, yeah. Who did we adopt as Australians that are really New Zealanders?
Could they make a phone call to Russell Crowe or somebody like that? I don't know.
Like that.
Well, he'd sort them out, wouldn't he?
I think so, yeah. It'd be a very different strategy, I
Imagine
think.
a Russell Crowe Prime Ministership in New Zealand. Thanks for that, Maxine.
Thank you.
That is Maxine Newlands, lecturer in political science at James Cook University, with us today.